Hi kids, it's Mrs. Boyt Live, and today we're going to be talking fractions. So I'm going to start by cutting it in halves. And we'll talk about halves later and what that means in relation to decimals and fractions, percentages. And then let's turn it and cut it in half again. So half of a half is a fourth. Half and half are 4 pieces. Now we have fourths. And then I'm going to turn it again and I'm going to cut it into eighths. And for the purpose of being able to enjoy this pie, I'm only going to eighths today. But if I take 1 piece out of this pie, I am taking out 1/8 of the pie. If I take out 2 pieces of this pie, I am taking out 2/8, and so on. We all know that a fraction is a piece of a number. It's not the whole number. A whole number is 1. At least 1, but anything less than 1 is a piece or a fraction of a number. The best way to think about percentages, fractions, and decimals is to think of it, I think, as money. I always convert into money because money makes sense. Pun intended. Okay, let's just talk about the pie. We saw the pie earlier, and this is 1/2, when my first cut 1/2 of the pie. So if I cut the pie in half, that means I have 1/2 of the pie. That means I have converted that to 1/2. Now I can move these into equivalent fractions. 2 is really easy to move into tenths. And I want you to think about percentages. When we talk about percentages, we talk about the other columns on the right side of the decimal point, right? The numbers on the left side of the decimal point are all whole numbers. When you get to the numbers on the right side of the decimal point, those are pieces of numbers. All right, here it is. If we have 0 whole numbers on that left side, our decimal point is dividing the 0 numbers from the other numbers. And remember, when reading a decimal point, this is the only time where you can say "and" in your number. I have to put this through every year. If I have this number, you say that 2,475,247. This decimal says thousands. This decimal says millions. 2,475,247. I don't see anywhere where you can say "and" there. This decimal point says "and." If I have this number now, suddenly, I wish I had that on my bank account. I suddenly have 2,475,247, let's call it dollars, and 25 cents. And a decimal can say "and." That's what it says in math. So let's say I have 0 in this column. I have 5, 2, and 7. That's called 527 thousandths. And I can use this 7, and I usually, how much change do I have? I'll round up. I have actually now, let's round up and just say I have 53 cents. In fact, that's really how it works when you're doing taxes. That's how it works in the bank. Banks, rounding is up, rounding is on. 5 or more you round up, 4 or less you round down. And so the tenths, the hundredths, and the thousandths, this is important for you to understand for today's lesson. That thousandths place, we don't even have a coin for that denomination. You would need 1,000 of that piece to make 1 whole number, 1,000 of those, 1,000 thousandths. So you would need 100 hundredths and 10 tenths to make 1 whole. Let's go back to the board and talk about equivalent fractions. If I have 1/2 of the pie, I can write that as 1 over 2 or 1/2. But it's important to know that whatever you do to the denominator of the fraction, the bottom number, you also have to do to the numerator. So I can turn 2 into 10. How do I do that? By multiplying by 5. So 2 times 5 is 10, and 1 times 5 is 5. So it's fair to say, and it's right to say, that 1/2 is equal to 5/10. It's also fair to say that I can also turn that into hundredths. And I can do that by multiplying 2 by 50 and 1 by 50. So 2 times 50 is 100, and 1 times 50 is 50. And now this is worth 50 hundredths. So 5/10 is worth 0.5, 5 in the tenths place, and 50 hundredths is worth 0.50. That says 50 hundredths. Now the way you convert a decimal into a fraction is you simply move the decimal point over 2 times to the right. And then you turn it into a percentage with a percentage symbol. And that's as easy as fractions to decimals to percentages are. But 1/2 is easy, right? It's an equal number. But what if you have something like 1/4? 1/4 can't turn into a 10. You can't turn a 4 into 10 by multiplying it by a number. You actually can't. But you can turn 4 into 20 by multiplying it by 5, and then you can multiply the top by 5. 5/20ths. 0.2, it's 2/10. You can do that. It's equivalent. It doesn't really make much sense as far as a percentage because we have to get that number to 100. Now, I can multiply 4 times 25 to make it 100, and then 1 times 25 to make it 25. So 25 hundredths is actually an equivalent fraction, and it means 25 hundredths or 0.25. Now, when I turn it into 0.25, I just simply move the decimal point again 2 spaces to the right and pop on that percentage sign. And it's really fair to say that if 1/4 is 25%, then 2/4 is double that. 2/4 is 50%, and 3/4 is triple 25. So it's 75%. And of course, we know 4/4 is 4 and 4. Whenever those numbers match, you have a whole number. 4/4 is 100%. But what if you have a number like 1/6? What if you have 1/6? How do you convert that? That's a little harder. You can't turn 6 into 10, and you can't turn 6 into 100. But there is a way to do it. The way to do it is we remember. We remember that this 1 divided by 6, that this line is a line of division. So you can do 1 divided by 6 and find out what your percentage is, what your decimal is, and turn that into the percentage by moving the decimal point over 2 spaces. So in this case, 6 went into 10 one time, 10 minus 6, you have the 4, bring down the 0. You do that twice, and this is your answer, 0.166. That's what it's worth. So if you move that over 2 spaces, then you have, what? 16.6%. Now, sometimes rounding is on there. On your grade book, it's usually on. So that 16.6% will turn into a 17%. Still not a great score. Hopefully you do better than that. But 2/6, what do? You just double that. 3/6, what's 3/6? I want you to think logically about this. Anytime your numerator is half of your denominator, it's 50%. Anytime that top number is half of the bottom number, it is 50%. And anytime the top and the bottom number match, it is one whole number. It equals 1. This always equals 0.5 or 50% when the numerator is half of the denominator. So don't do too much work on things like that. Let's say we have 1/8. Remember, we cut the pie into 8 pieces. How much is 1/8 worth? It's kind of really actually beneficial to just know this, 1/8 is 12.5%. Because how do I know that? 2/8 is 1/4, and 1/4 of the pie is 25%. So if you divide 25 into half, it's 12.5. So cognitively, you can just memorize that, but it works too when you do the division work. When you say 1 divided by 8. 1 divided by 8 is 0.125. That's how it works out. Move that decimal point over 2 spaces, 12.5%. You double that, 2/8 of the pie. Now it's 25%. Double that, add 12.5 to that. Just add it again. Quadruple that. Now, what do you have? You have the 4/8. What's that? What's 4? It's half of 8. So now you're back at your 50%. But with 8s, every time you just add that 12.5%. The important takeaway here is just to recognize a few things. Recognize how fractions turn into this 1/6 or 1/8, which also means 1 divided by 6 and 1 divided by 8. That's how you turn it in and convert it to that decimal. Sometimes you can do it easily like this without a division problem, and sometimes you need to put it in the division box and do the work. Also remember, in order to turn that decimal into percentage, all you have to do is move that decimal point over 2 spaces and plop on that percentage sign. Remember that sometimes rounding is on and sometimes it's off. Refer to what your teacher's directives are. I hope this cleared up a little bit about how fractions relate to decimals and how they relate to percentages. They're all parts of numbers. And remember, it's the one time when you see that decimal point you could get away with saying "and" when reading your numbers. All right, so I'm just going to sit here and have me some Jelly Bellies. You guys have a good day. Bye.
No, why does it have to end?